Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into a political life that didn't just span decades. It fundamentally reshaped American power. We're talking, of course, about Richard B. Cheney.
Yeah, Dick Cheney.
Mm.
It's basically impossible to talk about modern American government, especially, post 9/11, without really grappling with his influence. He's often called the most powerful vice president in American history, and frankly, that description feels pretty accurate.
It does. The sources we've got paint this incredible picture, right? From like a fairly normal start in Nebraska and Wyoming,
Right, Casper mostly.
all the way through the absolute highest levels of power in D.C., multiple administrations, even a stint as a Fortune 500 CEO.
And then back again, right into the thick of it after 9/11. The sheer trajectory is just astounding.
So our mission today, it's not just listing dates and jobs. We want to track that specific path, look hard at the policies he drove, especially national security, executive power, and, how people saw him, how that changed over time, right up to his death in 2025.
Exactly. And the big question, the one we keep coming back to, is what's the actual legacy? What's left behind from this, ultimate political insider?
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this. Where do we start? The beginning, I guess. The making of the man.
All right. So born in Lincoln, Nebraska, but really his formative years are Casper, Wyoming. And his academic start, it's interesting. He heads off to Yale.
The Ivy League path.
Yeah, but it doesn't stick.
Hmm?
He struggled there. Grades weren't great. He actually dropped out twice.
Twice. I didn't realize that. That's significant. It kind of punctures the image of this, straight arrow academic climb.
It really does. It shows this early disconnect, maybe a lack of focus.
Hmm.
He ends up back in Wyoming, eventually gets his bachelor's and master's in political science from the University of Wyoming. Good degrees, solid school, but it wasn't the initial plan A.
And he started a PhD too, right? But didn't finish.
That's right, University of Wisconsin-Madison, political science PhD. Got all the way to the dissertation, apparently, but then Washington called. He took a fellowship instead.
But before that academic path really solidifies, there's this other pretty major bump in the road.
Oh, yeah, the DWIs. 2 convictions for driving while intoxicated. He was young, 21 and 22.
That's more than just like a youthful mistake. Those are serious charges.
Absolutely. And he talked about it later, said it was a real wake-up call. He described himself as being headed down a bad road. It seems like that forced him to, get serious.
A pivot point, as he called it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And right around then, 1964, he marries Lynn Vincent, his high school sweetheart. Things start to lock into place. The focus shifts.
Okay, so it's getting focused, finishing degrees. But this is the 1960s. What about Vietnam? That looms large for any young man then.
It does. And Cheney's record there is, well, it's become a point of contention, especially given his later role as Secretary of Defense. He received 5 draft deferments in total.
5. How did that break down?
Well, the first 4 were basically student deferments. Kept him in college while he worked on his BA and MA. That stretched things out, partly because, as we said, he had some academic struggles, and he also needed to work.
Okay, so that covers the student years. What was the 5th?
The 5th one was a 3A classification. That was a hardship deferment, typically granted to men with dependents.
Ah, because he'd gotten married to Lynn.
Exactly. And their first daughter, Elizabeth, was born relatively quickly, about 9 months after the wedding. So he got the 3A deferment, and eventually he just aged out of draft eligibility at 26 without serving.
And that led to that really blunt quote later on, didn't it?
The famous one, yeah. In 1989, when he was up for Secretary of Defense, the Washington Post asked him about it, and he said, "I had other priorities in the 60s than military service."
Wow, that's direct. And you can see how that would cause some friction later, given his very hawkish stance.
Definitely raises questions for people about, personal sacrifice versus policy advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
But from that point, his ambition really seemed to crystallize around Washington.
And the rise was fast, like really fast.
Incredibly fast. He gets his foot in the door in '69 as an intern for Congressman William Steiger.
And that's where he connects with Donald Rumsfeld.
That's the key connection. He joins Rumsfeld's staff at the Office of Economic Opportunity under Nixon. Rumsfeld becomes his mentor, pulls him along.
So he climbs through the Nixon administration, then into the Ford administration.
Right. And when Ford makes Rumsfeld his Secretary of Defense, guess who takes over Rumsfeld's old job as White House Chief of Staff?
Cheney, at age
34. Just 34 years old. It's 1975. Think about that. He's running the White House staff, navigating the fallout from Watergate, managing Ford's 76 campaign from inside the West Wing.
That's an insane amount of responsibility at that age. He must have learned the mechanics of executive power inside out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Not from a textbook, but from the absolute center of the storm. That experience, that deep practical understanding of how the levers of power work that shaped everything that came later.
Okay, so Ford loses in 76. Cheney's out of the White House. What's next? Does he stick around D.C.?
Not immediately. He actually went back to Wyoming for a couple of years, did some work in the private sector, but politics pulled him back. In 1978, he runs for Wyoming's only House seat.
And wins, so he spends the next decade in Congress.
Yep, from 1979 to 1989, 10 years representing Wyoming. And he wasn't just a backbencher. He rose pretty quickly through the Republican leadership ranks in the House.
What roles did he hold?
He became chairman of the House Republican Conference, which is a significant leadership position. And then, just before he left the House, he was briefly the House Minority Whip in early '89. So he learned the legislative game, too.
That's actually a really crucial point, isn't it? He now has deep experience in both the executive branch and the legislative branch. He understands both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue.
Precisely. That dual perspective is pretty rare, especially the level he operated.
So looking at his actual record in the House, what does it tell us about his core beliefs back then?
Well, you definitely see the fiscal conservatism
Yeah.
very clearly. He was consistently worried about government spending, federal overreach, deficits.
Any specific example?
Oh, yeah. The creation of the Department of Education. He voted strongly against it. Saw it as a prime example of the federal government intruding on states' rights and local issues and just adding to the bureaucracy and cost.
Okay, classic conservative stance. What about social issues or things like civil rights?
That's where it gets, like we said earlier, a bit more complex. Take the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. In 1978, he voted against establishing it.
Against it initially.
Right. But then fast forward 5 years to 1983, and he votes for it.
So a change of heart. Or reading the political tea leaves.
Hard to say definitively from the outside, Could be either, or a mix. But the contrast is there.
And then there was the whole issue with South Africa and apartheid during the Reagan years. That was a major global focus.
The huge one. And in 1986, Cheney voted against overriding President Reagan's veto of the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act. He was in the minority on that one. Only 83 representatives voted that way.
So, siding with Reagan against imposing strong sanctions on the apartheid regime, what was the justification?
Well, his public stance was about the effectiveness of sanctions. He argued that unilateral sanctions, meaning just the U.S. acting alone, almost never work. That was his sort of foreign policy realism argument.
But was there more to it? You mentioned the ANC earlier.
Right. Around the same time, he also voted against a resolution calling for Nelson Mandela's release from prison. And later on, he explained that vote partly by saying that the ANC, the African National Congress,
Mandela's party?
exactly, was viewed by, let's say, influential parts of the U.S. government at the time as a terrorist organization.
Why? Because of Cold War politics.
Pretty much. Their ties to the Soviet Union, their arms struggle. From Cheney's perspective, or at least the perspective he was reflecting, that Cold War alignment seemed to be the overriding concern. It really frames him as a Cold War hawk, first and foremost in that era.
Okay, so he serves a decade in the House, rises in leadership.
Yeah.
Then what pulls him back to the executive branch?
It was actually kind of sudden. President George H.W. Bush gets elected in '88. His first pick for Secretary of Defense was John Tower, former senator.
Right, I remember that nomination fight. It was bruising.
Extremely. And Tower's nomination ultimately failed in the Senate. So Bush needed a replacement, someone competent, respected, confirmable. He pivots quickly to Cheney.
And Cheney sails through.
Astonishingly smoothly. Confirmed 92 Gillett by the Senate in 1989. No controversy at all. He was seen as a very safe, capable choice.
And he walks right into some major global events as Secretary of Defense.
Immediately. First, there's the invasion of Panama, Operation Just Cause, in late '89 to oust Noriega.
Okay.
And then the really big one, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, leading to Operation Desert Shield, and then Operation Desert Storm, the Gulf War in 1991. He's overseeing massive military operations.
But at the same time, the Cold War is ending. The Berlin Wall had fallen. The Soviet Union is collapsing. There's this talk of a peace dividend.
Exactly. So Cheney has this incredibly contradictory mandate. On one hand, manage these hot wars. On the other, oversee a huge drawdown of the U.S. military because the primary adversary, the Soviet Union, is disappearing.
How big a drawdown are we talking?
Significant. The sources show he cut total military personnel by about 19%. That's reducing the force from roughly 2.2 million down to about 1.8 million by 1993. He had to cut the budget while also figuring out how the U.S. maintains dominance in this new unipolar world.
That's a massive strategic challenge, waging war while shrinking the military.
Huge. And it leads us to probably the most critical decision of that era, certainly in hindsight. The decision not to go all the way to Baghdad at the end of Desert Storm.
Right, stopping the ground war after liberating Kuwait, leaving Saddam Hussein in power. Why did they make that call? Cheney was central to that, wasn't he?
Absolutely central. And he explained the reasoning very clearly a few years later in a C-SPAN interview in 1994. It's fascinating to hear him lay it out, especially knowing what happened later.
What did he say?
He said going to Baghdad would have been a bad idea. He argued it would have led to a quagmire. He worried the U.S. would be acting alone without the coalition support they had for liberating Kuwait.
Okay, concerns about getting bogged down, lack of international support.
And also regional stability. He worried about Iraq potentially breaking apart, the impact on, say, Turkey with Kurdish separatism in the north. But the most striking part was his calculation about casualties versus the objective.
What was the calculation?
He basically asked, how many additional dead Americans is Saddam worth? His conclusion, and the administration's, was not very many. He said, I think we got it right by stopping where they did, avoiding an occupation and the uncertain political outcome.
That's remarkable. A cautious, real politics assessment focused on avoiding a quagmire and limiting American casualties for an unclear goal.
Precisely. And you just have to hold that thought, that specific rationale, because it stands in such stark, dramatic contrast to the decisions he championed less than a decade later.
Okay, so the first Bush administration ends. Clinton wins in '92. Cheney leaves the Pentagon. Does he stay in politics?
No, this time he heads to the private sector. And not just any job. He becomes chairman and CEO of Halliburton.
Halliburton, the big oil field services company. That name would definitely come up again later.
Oh, absolutely. He ran Halliburton from 1995 to 2000. And this is where he really made his personal fortune. His government service paid okay, but Halliburton, that was different.
How different are we talking?
Well, estimates of his net worth jumped significantly. When he resigned in 2000 to join the Bush ticket, he reportedly received something like $36 million, mostly severance and stock options from Halliburton.
$36 million. Wow. So his wealth is largely tied to this corporate period.
Very much so. But that time wasn't without its shadows either. There were some legal issues connected to Halliburton during and after his tenure.
Like what?
There was a class action lawsuit from shareholders. They alleged the company had artificially inflated its stock price while he was CEO. Now, he wasn't personally named as a defendant in that suit, but it happened on his watch.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, later on, in 2010, there was a Nigerian corruption case. The Nigerian government filed charges claiming bribery related to contracts had occurred during Cheney's time there. Halliburton eventually settled those charges for a hefty sum, around $250 million.
So huge financial success, but also some, let's say, complex corporate baggage as he heads back into the political arena in 2000.
Exactly. And the way he got back in was, well, it was classic Cheney, in a way.
How so?
George W. Bush wins the Republican nomination in 2000. He tasks Dick Cheney with leading the search committee to find his vice presidential running mate.
So Cheney is vetting all the potential VPs?
He's running the whole process.
Yeah.
Evaluating candidates, making recommendations. And then at the end of it all, who does Bush pick?
Cheney himself.
Cheney himself. He basically ran the search that selected him. It's either incredibly efficient or, raises some eyebrows.
It's definitely unusual. Did that cause any problems?
It caused one immediate, very specific technical problem because of the U.S. Constitution,
Yeah.
the 12th Amendment.
The 12th Amendment. Remind me what that says.
It basically says that the electors from any given state can't cast their votes for both a president and a vice president who are inhabitants of that same state.
Ah. And Bush was governor of Texas.
And Cheney, at that point, was legally a resident of Texas, too, because of his Halliburton job based in Dallas.
So the Texas electors couldn't vote for both of them. That's a problem.
A big one. So Cheney had to scramble. He very quickly had to change his legal residency, switch his voter registration back to Wyoming, where he still owned property and had deep roots.
Just to satisfy that constitutional requirement. Amazing the details you have to manage at that level.
It really is.
Yeah.
But they sorted it out. He's officially from Wyoming again, and they win eventually after the Florida recount.
Right. And then not long into their first term, September 11th happens, and everything changes. How did that immediately impact Cheney's role?
Profoundly. Almost instantly, security protocols kicked in that physically separated Cheney from Bush much of the time. The idea was continuity of government. If one was attacked, the other would survive.
So he wasn't always in the White House?
No. He spent significant time working from, quote, undisclosed locations. Sometimes that was the vice president's official residence, sometimes his home back in Wyoming, sometimes Camp David. It created this physical distance, this separate operational hub.
Which must have enhanced his unique power base, being somewhat outside the day-to-day West Wing churn.
You could argue that. It certainly underscored his importance in the line of succession. And constitutionally, his role became visible too.
Oh.
Twice, President Bush had to undergo routine medical procedures, colonoscopies that required anesthesia. Both times, in 2002 and 2007, Bush formally invoked the 25th Amendment, temporarily transferring the powers of the presidency to Cheney.
So Cheney literally was acting president briefly.
Yes, for a few hours each time. It was procedural, but symbolically, it showed he was treated functionally as a true partner, almost a co-executive, in a way few VPs ever are.
Okay, but let's get to the heart of his vice presidency, especially after 9/11, the war on terror, and particularly the push for the Iraq War in 2003. The sources are pretty clear he was a driving force behind that, right?
Oh, absolutely instrumental. He was arguably the key architect within the administration pushing for the invasion of Iraq.
And the justification publicly centered on two main things.
Two big claims, yeah. First, that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, which posed an imminent threat. And second, that Saddam had an operational relationship with al-Qaeda.
That second point, the al-Qaeda link, was crucial for connecting Iraq to 9/11 in the public mind, wasn't it?
Exactly. It suggested Iraq was somehow complicit in the attacks, even though the attackers were primarily Saudi. But what did the intelligence actually say?
That's the million-dollar question.
Well, our sources and later investigations like the 9/11 Commission report are very clear. U.S. intelligence had, and I quote, scant credible evidence linking Saddam Hussein to the 9/11 attacks. The 9/11 Commission found no collaborative relationship.
So the link wasn't there, according to the intelligence community itself.
Correct. And of course, after the invasion, no significant WMD stockpiles were ever found either. The entire premise, the casus belli, essentially collapsed under scrutiny.
Yet Cheney pushed these points relentlessly. How did he do that? Was he just relying on the intelligence briefings he got?
It seems he went much further than that. One of the most extraordinary things detailed in the sources is that Cheney, the vice president, made multiple trips himself over to CIA headquarters at Langley.
He went there personally. That's unusual.
Highly unusual. And reports suggest he wasn't just passively receiving briefings. He was actively questioning mid-level CIA analysts, digging for intelligence, looking for nuggets that supported the administration's case for war, sometimes bypassing the normal chain of command and analysis.
So critics would say he was pressure testing the intelligence, maybe even cherry-picking or pressuring analysts.
That's certainly the allegation, that he was trying to find intelligence that fit the desired policy outcome, rather than letting the intelligence drive the policy. It blurred the line significantly.
And even years later, after no WMDs were found and the al-Qaeda link was debunked, did he back down?
Not at all. He remained absolutely steadfast. As late as 2014, he was still insisting Saddam had a 10-year relationship with al-Qaeda. He dismissed critics of the war as opportunists, spreading cynical and pernicious falsehoods.
Wow. That's conviction. Or something else. It shows he saw this not just as policy, but as a fundamental truth, regardless of evidence.
It certainly seems that way. An unwavering belief in the necessity and righteousness of the action, facts notwithstanding for his critics.
Okay, so the Iraq War is underway. It's becoming increasingly controversial. What else defined Cheney's second term?
A major theme was this intense focus on executive power. He didn't just wield power. He had a whole philosophy about it. He saw his role, and Bush's, as needing to restore the power of the presidency.
Restore it from what? What did he think weakened it?
Basically, everything that came out of the post-Watergate, post-Vietnam era, he felt Congress had overreacted and put too many constraints on the president, especially in national security.
You're talking about things like
FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which required warrants for domestic spying. The War Powers Resolution, which tried to limit the president's ability to wage war without congressional approval. Even things like the Presidential Records Act, demanding transparency, or the Freedom of Information Act.
So he was actively trying to roll back those checks and balances.
That was the argument. His philosophy, often called the unitary executive theory, basically says the Constitution gives the president inherent, almost unlimited authority as commander-in-chief, especially in wartime, and Congress can't really interfere with that core executive function.
That's a pretty radical view of presidential power.
It's a very expansive view, and he wasn't just talking about it, he acted on it. The physical setup of his office even reflected this unique power.
How so?
Well, he had multiple offices, West Wing, Old Executive Office Building, Senate, but he also maintained one near the House floor. He was everywhere. But the most telling detail, the safes. Yeah, reports indicate he used his own security classification system for some documents and kept them in 3 huge man-sized safes in his offices. This was seen by critics as a way to potentially bypass the Presidential Records Act to keep his operations shielded from oversight and scrutiny.
Creating like a parallel information stream outside the normal channels.
That's the implication. A fortress of secrecy built around his office and its operations.
And this philosophy directly influenced policy on surveillance and interrogation, didn't it?
Hugely. He was one of the strongest advocates, maybe the strongest, for the NSA's warrantless surveillance program, arguing FISA was too cumbersome in the fight against terror.
And the enhanced interrogation techniques.
He championed them aggressively. He saw them as necessary tools. Later, he openly admitted he signed off on the use of waterboarding, which many define as torture.
Which led to massive controversy, obviously, calls for investigation, even prosecution.
So yes, domestically and internationally. Human rights groups, some legal scholars, even some foreign governments argued that his role in authorizing and promoting these techniques potentially made him liable under international laws regarding torture and war crimes. It remains one of the most intensely debated aspects of his legacy.
Amidst all this, there was another major storm brewing, closer to home for him. The CIA leak scandal.
Right, the Plame affair. This blew up in the second term. It involved the leaking of the identity of a covert CIA operative, Valerie Plame.
And Cheney's own chief of staff got caught up in it.
His right-hand man, I. Lewis Scooter, Libby. He wasn't charged with the leak itself, but with lying to investigators and obstructing the investigation. He was convicted in 2007 on multiple felony counts, perjury, obstruction of justice.
That had to be a huge blow to Cheney, personally and politically.
Devastating. And Cheney's loyalty to Libby was absolute. Our sources detail how Cheney fought tooth and nail right up to the very last days of the Bush administration, trying to get President Bush to grant Libby a full presidential pardon.
Bush commuted Libby's prison sentence, but never issued the full pardon Cheney wanted, right?
Correct. Bush resisted the full pardon. But Cheney's description of Libby during that lobbying effort is really revealing. He called Libby a soldier on the battlefield, someone who took the hit for the administration. It shows how Cheney viewed politics as warfare, essentially.
So Iraq, executive power battles, torture debates, the Plame affair. How did all this affect how the public saw Cheney?
Predictably, his popularity tanked. Right after 9/11, he had this moment of unity. Approval ratings hit, like 68%, very high.
But it didn't last.
Not at all. As the Iraq War dragged on, as these controversies piled up, his numbers just plummeted. By the time they left office in early 2009, his approval rating was down to an astonishingly low 13%.
13%, that's abysmal, almost unheard of for a VP not caught in like a personal corruption scandal.
It reflected a deep public rejection of the administration's policies,
Yeah.
and maybe his style too. He often seemed indifferent to public opinion.
Was that the context for that infamous "so" comment?
Yeah, exactly. In 2008, near the end, he was asked about polls showing most Americans thought the Iraq War wasn't worth fighting. His response was just, so.
Wow, just dismissive.
It crystallized the image for many people that he was insulated, didn't care what the public thought, believed he knew best regardless.
And then on top of everything else, there was the hunting accident.
Ah, yes, February 2006, the quail hunt in Texas. He accidentally shoots his friend, Harry Whittington, a 78-year-old lawyer.
With a shotgun. How badly was Whittington hurt?
It was serious. It wasn't just birdshot pellets in the skin. Whittington actually suffered a minor heart attack afterwards because one of the pellets lodged near his heart. Doctors had to leave dozens of pellets in his body.
That's terrifying. And it became this huge media story, partly because of how the VP's office handled the news initially.
Right. There was a delay in reporting it publicly. But beyond the immediate political fallout, it just added to this perception of Cheney as being involved in controversy, maybe even slightly accident-prone, although obviously this was far more serious. And yes, his poll numbers took another dip after that incident, too.
Okay, so Bush and Cheney leave office in January 2009. What does Cheney do next? Fade away. Write memoirs.
Well, he did write memoirs, but fading away wasn't really his style. What really came to dominate his post-VP life, though, was his health. His heart condition, which had been present for decades, became much more acute.
He had heart problems going way back, didn't he?
Way back. His first heart attack was at age 37. He ended up having 5 heart attacks over his lifetime. Plus multiple bypass surgeries, stents put in. He had a defibrillator implanted. It was a constant battle.
It's incredible that he functioned at such a high level for so long with those issues.
Truly. But after leaving office, things got much more serious. He developed severe congestive heart failure, and that led to a really extraordinary medical intervention in 2010.
What was that?
He received a left ventricular assist device, an LVAD. It's basically a mechanical pump implanted in the chest that helps the weakened heart circulate blood.
Okay, a heart pump.
But here's the astonishing part. Because the LVAD provides a continuous flow of blood, not the pulsing beat of a natural heart, Cheney lived for almost 15 months without a detectable pulse.
Wait, seriously, no pulse?
Medically, yes. Sustained entirely by this machine. It was almost science fiction. He was alive, conscious, functioning, but without that fundamental sign of life.
That's unbelievable. How did that result?
He was waiting for a heart transplant, and he finally received one in March 2012. His sheer physical resilience, surviving all that, was just remarkable.
It really is. Okay, so health aside, what about his political voice after leaving office? Did he stay involved? Did his views change on anything?
He definitely stayed involved, mostly as a critic of the Obama administration initially. But we did see some interesting shifts, particularly on social issues. One big one was gay marriage.
How so? His daughter Mary is openly gay and married, right?
Yes. And Cheney had always been personally supportive of her and her relationship, even during the Bush years, when the party platform was very much against same-sex marriage. After leaving office, his stance became more public and broader.
He came out in favor of gay marriage, generally.
He did. He essentially adopted a more libertarian view, saying the government shouldn't be involved, people should be free to enter into whatever kind of union they wished. He even actively lobbied some Maryland state legislators in 2012, urging them to vote for legalizing same-sex marriage there.
That's a pretty significant evolution from the administration he served in.
It really was. It showed maybe a different side, prioritizing family and individual liberty over party orthodoxy on that specific issue.
But the biggest political shift, the one that made headlines, was his stance on Donald Trump.
Oh, absolutely. That was dramatic. Initially, back in 2016, he did what most establishment Republicans did. He endorsed Trump as the party's nominee, albeit maybe not enthusiastically.
Standard party loyalty then, but that changed.
It changed completely after January 6, 2021, and Trump's efforts to overturn the election results. Cheney became one of Trump's fiercest critics from within the sort of traditional conservative wing of the Republican Party.
And his daughter, Liz Cheney, was obviously very central in the January 6th committee investigation.
Exactly. He strongly backed Liz in her fight against Trump and Trumpism, even appearing in a campaign ad for her during her tough 2022 primary race in Wyoming.
What'd he say in that ad?
It was powerful. He looked straight at the camera and called Donald Trump a coward and a threat to our republic. Coming from Dick Cheney, that carried immense weight for a certain segment of the party.
But the ultimate break came in 2024.
Yes. In the run-up to the 2024 election, with Trump as the Republican nominee again, Cheney took the absolutely extraordinary step for him of endorsing the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris.
Endorsing a Democrat over the Republican nominee, Cheney.
Yes. He stated publicly that he believed Trump represented an unprecedented threat to our republic, and that defeating him was paramount. It was a stunning final political statement, showing just how deep the divisions within the GOP had become and where Cheney ultimately stood just months before his death.
And he passed away not long after that election.
Correct. Dick Cheney died in November 2025 at age 84. The stated cause was complications from pneumonia and ongoing vascular disease.
And the reaction to his death, I imagine, reflected his entire career. Polarized.
Completely polarized. You had warm tributes pouring in from former presidents, George W. Bush, Clinton, Obama, Biden, and from vice presidents like Harris, Gore, Pence. They generally focused on his long service, his intellect, his dedication, even if they disagreed fiercely with his policies.
But not from everyone.
Conspicuously, there was public silence from the sitting president, Donald Trump, and his vice president, J.D. Vance. That silence spoke volumes about the rift he represented within the party he had served for so long.
So when the dust settles, What is the consensus, if any, on his legacy? What do the major assessments say?
The consistent theme across the board, really, is his transformation of the vice presidency and his impact on executive power, particularly in foreign policy. He's seen as the person who took a traditionally weak office and turned it into a major power center, operating almost as a co-president at times.
And the controversies remain.
Oh, absolutely. The Iraq War, the justification for it, the use of enhanced interrogation techniques, the expansion of surveillance powers, those remain profoundly controversial, defining parts of his legacy both here and around the world. He is, and likely always will be, a deeply polarizing.
So if we try to boil it all down, this deep dive into Dick Cheney's life and career really seems to circle back to this core idea, the nature and extent of executive power in America.
Exactly. His driving philosophy, this mission to restore presidential authority that he felt was lost after Watergate. That's the thread that runs through almost everything, from his early days as chief of staff to his actions as vice president.
It wasn't just about winning policy debates. It was about fundamentally reshaping the power dynamics between the branches of government.
Yes. He saw the constraints, FISA, war powers, oversight, as dangerous weaknesses, especially in a post-9/11 world. He used every tool at his disposal, from legal theory like the unitary executive to practical measures like his unique office setup and, critics would say, the manipulation of intelligence to push back against those constraints.
Which leads to a really crucial question for us today, looking back at his legacy. He pushed so hard to expand that executive power, often challenging those post-Watergate limits. And in many ways, subsequent administrations, both Democrat and Republican, have arguably continued to wield or even expand some of those powers he asserted.
That's the critical point. So here's something for you, the listener, to think about. Has Cheney's vision of a restored, more powerful executive branch essentially won out? Is that expansion of presidential authority, especially in national security, now just a permanent feature of the American system?
Has the balance shifted definitively, maybe permanently, regardless of who occupies the White House or the vice president's office? Is that the most enduring legacy of Dick Cheney?
It's a sobering thought, and perhaps the most important question his long and controversial career leaves us with.